I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. This week, Times opinion writer Mara Gay, she'll share her perspective on the future of housing, political power in New York, and what to watch for under our incoming mayor. But first, City Hall Bureau Chief Emma Fitzsimmons, a crucial part of the New York Times political coverage. She's here to share her latest insights on what's driving city politics. Emma, a meeting between the incoming mayor and the president on Friday. We're previewing that today. What is the mayor-elect going to ask the president for?
So Zohran Mamdani asked for this meeting. He said he wants to sort of set the stage with Trump to talk about affordability, to talk about grocery prices. He really ran on standing up to Trump, but for now he sort of has this more conciliatory tone. I think he just wants to establish a rapport because they don't know each other.
And what was Trump's reaction to the mayor's request for this meeting?
He said recently, "Oh, I'll take a moment with him. I want the city to succeed." But of course, that's a completely different tune from during the campaign. He said Mamdani would be a disaster for New York. He supported Andrew Cuomo during the campaign. Some of his advisors tried to meddle in the campaign. So he's really fiercely attacked Mamdani repeatedly.
We talked about during the campaign that the Republicans, the White House, wanted Mamdani as a foil for Republicans in national elections. Is that still true, or do we think that the president is trying to make peace of some sort with Mamdani in his home city?
I think it will be very tempting for Trump to use Mamdani as a foil as the midterms approach. He wants to paint Democrats as out of touch, too far left, anti-police. He might want to use Mamdani as a foil. At the same time, he is a New Yorker. He has, allies, friends who are here. I don't think he wants the city to tank. But I do think there's real concern that after Mamdani takes office on January 1st, he might try to send in the National Guard and sort of lay down the law in New York City while we have this socialist mayor.
Why is it such a big deal about him sending in the National Guard when Governor Hochul sent in the National Guard to the subways?
Hochul has been insistent. She said, we don't need the National Guard. Crime is down. Jesse Tisch, the police commissioner who's going to stay under Mamdani, said we don't need the National Guard. Crime is down. So they really feel like it's not needed here. And they also don't want a surge of immigration officials. This is a home to a lot of immigrants, and they don't want this climate of fear for them.
We learned this week that Commissioner Tisch is staying on under a Mamdani administration. What are some of the other early appointments say about how Mamdani will govern as mayor?
So I think he'll name a schools chancellor soon. People often say the two most important jobs are the police commissioner and the schools. Those are the two things that New Yorkers really expect a mayor to deliver on. But his closest advisor has already been put in place, L. Biscard Church. Dean Fullahan is going to be first deputy mayor. Those are two really key people. And then next, I think we'll look at Corporation Council, Department of Transportation. There's things like whether he's going to have a childcare czar, right? Universal childcare is going to be a big priority in the new year. And then the transportation commissioner has to work on issues like free buses and busways. And so I think the most important hires to him are the ones that are key to his affordability agenda: free buses, childcare.
And the ones he's hired so far, what do they say about, is he looking for experienced people? Is he bringing in Democratic socialists? What type of people has he been hiring?
It's a mix of technocrats, like Dean Fullahan, who's served in previous administrations, and his closest advisor, Elle. I'm told that she's sort of similar to Emma Wolf under Bill de Blasio, right? She was really sort of running the show behind the scenes and someone he really trusted, and someone who prefers to be under sort of behind the scenes. But I think she's a member of the DSA, like Zohran. But I think he's shown that he does want to hire people with experience, veterans from the de Blasio administration. He'll keep some people from the Adams administration. Knowing that he's 34 and people are worried about his inexperience, I think he really wants to sort of stack his administration with people who have experience.
Emma, what does he have to do to prove to people that he is not a wild-eyed radical? Fascinating that we had Kathy Wild, the head of the New York Partnership, on the program not long ago before the election. She confided that she actually voted for Mamdani, which surprised me, frankly. But how does he bring other people of that nature along as supporters, or at least not as foes?
He's very good at charming people. Once he's in the room with Kathy Wild or business leaders, they often will leave and tell me like, oh, he's really charming and thoughtful and earnest. And so he's been sort of trying to charm person by person. But there's still this caricature, that some Republican radio hosts have of him, and they've sort of, Trump allies have called him a jihadist and, really focused on his Muslim faith. And so there still are these caricatures in the New York Post or about Mamdani. But I think the more people get to know him, like Kathy Wild, right? Like the biggest advocate for the business community, I think she decided he's probably going to win, and let's try to get him to understand our position. And he's already shown some willingness to compromise. He named Jessica Tisch. Many of his left-leaning allies did not want him to keep her, and he wants her to keep improving public safety, even though they disagree on some fundamental issues.
And what about getting along with the city council and its new leadership?
So I wrote about the speaker's race. There's a race right now to be the next city council speaker. There's Crystal Hudson, who's more progressive. There's Julie Menon, who has more support from moderate Democrats. And it'll be really interesting to see who wins that race. It's only the 51 members of the council. They get to decide it. And whether that person will help sort of enact his agenda or maybe be an obstacle to it. And I think both of them have said they want to work with Mamdani on issues like universal childcare. But he does have he needs to build a lot of relationships with the council. He's more familiar with state lawmakers because he is a state lawmaker. He doesn't have as many close relationships with the council. We did a piece on his inner circle, and there were no council members in his inner circle, right? So he needs to build those relationships, and he's trying not to come in and knock them around and tell them what to do. He's trying to say, he didn't weigh in on the ballot proposals that were about housing because he didn't want to anger them, right? He's trying to sort of...
He waited till the last minute.
On election day, he said, okay, I am voting for them. But I think he waited that long because he didn't want to try to tell the council, the council was against the ballot proposals, and he didn't want to try to tell them what to do. I think he wants to be a partner in government and respect them after Eric Adams has had so many problems with the council.
A lot of what he's wanted to do depends on other levels of government, whether it's free bus fares, whether it's mayoral control of the schools, rent freezes and the like. What does he have to depend on the council to get its permission to do?
He has to negotiate the city budget with them, right? So a lot of things that require city funding, he'll need to work with them on. His top advisor has already met with the council to discuss this new Department of Community Safety, this new public safety agency separate from the police to handle 911 calls regarding mental health. And so he needs the council buy-in for that to create this new city agency. And I think they'll go along with it. But he'll need to negotiate all sorts of things, that arise during a tenure. And the council will have their own priorities, right? The council often was passing bills. Adams vetoed them, and there were these, tried to override the vetoes. There was all this tension, but the council's going to come in with their own priorities. But I think that they will want to support universal childcare, and so will Kathy Hochul. But the most tension I'm seeing of his core proposals so far is Hochul sort of raised concerns about free buses and the cost of free buses. It could cost up to $1 billion a year, and she seemed not to have the appetite for that sort of expense right now.
What about the argument that free buses are simply going to attract homeless people living on them?
Some people have made that argument. I mean, already a lot of people don't pay the fare. And so he's saying, let's make them free and fast and reliable. And at the same time, he has a mental health plan, and he's going to be working to try to get homeless people off the streets and into better services. But I think, this was such a core part of his platform, and he's not going to just give up on it.
The governor says we're not going to raise income taxes. We're not going to tax the rich out of the state. How else is he going to raise money if not that way?
Yeah, Hochul's been very particular. She doesn't want to raise income taxes, but it's possible she might be open to other tax increases. But I think, when we brought him into the newsroom, we did an interview with him during the general election, and we asked him this question, and he said, look, we have a $115 billion city budget, an even bigger state budget. There's room within those budgets to make meaningful progress. So I could envision in the new year, they could move, universal childcare to only 2-year-olds in high-need neighborhoods and invest a couple $2 billion in it, and that would give him like an early win. And even he has already started to temper his language a little bit. He said, I'm going to achieve all of these goals in my 2 terms as mayor. So that gives him 8 years to do all of this stuff.
Why does he want to give up mayoral control of the schools? Local control, even though it was never fully implemented, didn't seem to work.
It's unusual for an executive to give up control, and Bloomberg fought so hard for mayoral control of schools, and a lot of people will say to me in private, this is like the thing I disagree with him about the most, because you really sort of need someone like where the buck stops with them when it comes to the schools. But he talks a lot about wanting to be a consensus builder, wanting to have a democratic, he comes from the Democratic Socialist Party, and last night they had this big meeting about Chiose running against Hakeem Jeffries. He showed up and spoke about how he didn't think Chiose should run for Congress right now. He sort of believes in democracy, even if that means that he might have less hands-on power himself.
Really? Why should Jeffries not be challenged?
So Zohran has asked Chi not to run. He said publicly he should not run. He said that he wants to focus on his agenda right now, and it'll be a distraction to have a left-leaning Democrat trying to oust the future Speaker of the House, potentially. He doesn't want to sow discord with Hakeem Jeffries, who barely endorsed him at the last minute during the race. And so I really think whether it comes to, Jessie Tisch, keeping her as police commissioner, or telling Chiose not to run, I think he really doesn't want distractions. He wants to come in and focus on these key affordability agenda and not have distractions about the future of the party or try to enact huge reforms at the police department in his first year.
And wants to sound more moderate.
Yeah, I think he is still very much himself. He is a Democratic Socialist proudly, but he wants to be a competent Democratic Socialist. He wants to get things done, and he doesn't want to have a lot of distractions. And those distractions often, hurt Eric Adams' legacy. There were a lot of political battles that some people would say he shouldn't have fought.
Quick last question. Where is Eric Adams?
I believe he's in Uzbekistan right now. He's been gone for quite some time, and he may still yet take a trip to Africa in his last month. But, Dana, my colleague, and I reported a story about this, and some people are just really sort of disappointed, baffled that he is spending his final weeks in office overseas on taxpayer-funded trips. And he says these are, to benefit the city, but people question whether it's also to benefit himself.
Emma Fitzsimmons, City Hall Bureau Chief of the New York Times, thank you for joining us. And coming up next, we'll hear from Times opinion writer Mara Gay. Mara Gay, award-winning New York Times opinion writer. She delivers essential analysis on the city's political changes. Welcome, Mara, and thank you for joining us. A kind of contrarian view in the New York Times. A lot of people saying that the election of Mayor-elect Mamdani is an aberration. Doesn't mean anything for the Democratic Party nationally. It is unique, sui generis to New York City. You say, wait a minute, not so fast. It does have major implications for the Democratic Party and politics nationally. How come?
Sam, thanks for having me. It's
Always.
great to be with you. Yeah, I think if you look at the coalition of voters that Zohran Mamdani put together, it looks strikingly like the country at large, and especially like the Democratic Party. He has strong support from young voters, drawing new people into the process, something that the Democrats nationally need to be able to do. He also has extremely strong support now among Black voters, which is a huge reversal from the primary when Andrew Cuomo won those voters. And honestly, he's performing well overall, not just in a far left base, but in mainstream Democratic neighborhoods. So we saw Mamdani perform well, in wealthy areas and in some of the poorest areas of the city. And this is an extremely strong multiracial coalition, also with Hispanic voters and South Asian voters. I think overall, that's kind of how the Democratic Party kind of needs to start rebuilding itself. One point of weakness with Mamdani was East Asian voters. And I think there's some questions, and I think there should be more reporting on that, frankly. But overall, I think it's really difficult for national Democrats to look at that kind of a coalition and say that it's not kind of lust-worthy for Democrats elsewhere. Of course, it's not going to, the policies might be a little bit different elsewhere, the way you run, the way you campaign. But overall, his support comes from the base, not the fringe of the party.
Why would that be when he is a self-declared socialist and Donald Trump calls him a communist?
Well, I think
assuming that label sticks anymore in America.
I just don't think that those labels worked. Of course, we're in an environment right now where if you look at what's happening in Washington, American institutions, democratic institutions are not just under attack, but the relationship between Americans and these institutions has essentially collapsed. And so what voters are looking for is clearly, at least in New York, a candidate who understands the pain that they're going through with affordability, for example, somebody who's going to fight for them. And I think they saw that in Mamdani as well, instead of kind of some of the milquetoast triangulation that we heard out of the Democratic leadership in Washington. And so I don't think voters are as interested in labels about, ideology as we may have thought. And one point about that is there has been this kind of fixed idea, for example, that black voters are just inherently more conservative, even within the Democratic Party. They'd never vote for a socialist. They would never vote for a young candidate. They prefer to stick with kind of known entities. Interesting that they swung so hard to Mamdani. I think that shows you that voters have an openness right now to really vote for someone who understands the country as it is and as ordinary people experience it.
That sounds a little bit like the Trump coalition.
It is, right? It's very interesting. I mean, I think that both Mamdani and Donald Trump ran as outsiders, and they ran as people who were going to reform their party. Now, Donald Trump said he was going to drain the swamp. I think he pretty much brought the swamp to Washington, but that was the campaign promise. And, affordability also was part of Donald Trump's campaign promise, not something that he's been able to deliver. But Mamdani was also able to talk about affordability in a way that felt real to people. So we've heard Hakeem Jeffries talk about affordability, others, but when Mamdani talked about affordability, he said the buses should be free, childcare should be free, no one in this city should be hungry. We can have, city pilot for city-owned grocery stores. And the rent should be frozen. That just connected deeply with the way people actually live. That brought new people into the process. And I think that it created a relationship between voters and Mamdani that, especially through his charisma, is quite deep. And you see that when you're on the street with him. It's extraordinary to watch, not only because he's charismatic, but because of the way voters have responded to him. And some of that is about authenticity.
You talked about voters, cabbies at LaGuardia Airport responding. Tell us about that.
Oh, it was pretty extraordinary. I spent an evening with the then candidate at LaGuardia Airport, and Mamdani was canvassing taxi drivers that night. And I arrived at LaGuardia Airport, and actually there was a line of tourists who were waiting for the taxi dispatcher. And the taxi dispatcher had actually temporarily left his post because he heard that Zohran Mamdani was there. And he was so excited that he FaceTimed his wife and had her meet him in person.
On FaceTime?
On FaceTime. The line of taxi drivers came to a halt as they got out of their cars to greet this candidate. Of course, the backstory here is that the assemblyman, Mr. Mamdani, had actually gone on a hunger strike several years ago with the taxi drivers, as they are suffering from the debt crisis with the medallion scandal. And so, that connection, though, between working people, working New Yorkers, people who have not generally participated in a kind of consistent way in local politics, and Mr. Mamdani is something new. So this is a new coalition. And he's drawing more people into the process. And even if you don't, come from his ideological tradition, as a Democrat who is extremely successful so far, you've got to be looking at that with some envy and curiosity. And if you're not, I'm not sure what you're doing there.
The taxi loan's a story that Brian Rosenthal wrote about in the New York Times. You talk about his personal talent as a campaigner. How much of that was a factor? That's something that President Trump even recognizes and praises in Mamdani. We see a lot of factors that could have affected the election: money, TV, social media, union endorsements. How much is Mamdani's personality, how much did that impact the election, do you think? And does that make him unique in a sense?
Enormously. It impacted it enormously. These things are an art, not a science, as you know, Sam, but I haven't seen people react, just ordinary people react to a candidate in this way since Barack Obama. I think he is probably the best asset that his campaign has. And so, there's something about him that people saw as real. He's very magnetic. I watched him the same night I was with him and the cab drivers. I saw him at the kebab house in Queens, and the owners and the staff there was thrilled to have him. There were a lot of, kind of other average New Yorkers around. And when the food came out, Mamdani stood up and started actually serving people food around the room. I've never really seen anything like it. So you can't really teach. You can't teach that. He clearly has that thing. And also he understands, especially because he's only 34 years old, how to use that in a campaign. So the walk they did through Manhattan before the primary, the scavenger hunt after the primary, getting New Yorkers involved, the idea of creating a social movement in a city that has suffered a pandemic. There's a loneliness crisis. I mean, it is something that we haven't seen before, and he's been able to kind of tap into this cultural zeitgeist, especially with young people, using social media, to reach people not just in New York, but across the country. It's pretty stunning. After the election, I heard from voters, mostly Democrats, across the country, friends, colleagues, people saying, oh gosh, we are so excited about this. It's like, this is the mayor's race. Mm-hmm. So something is happening there. I think the downside for him is, the mayor of New York is the second hardest job in the country. And so unlike someone like AOC, he's going to be judged based on how he actually delivers on these very concrete promises.
How is he going to deliver? These are tough things to deliver under any circumstances, and many of them are beyond his control.
Well, I think you have to kind of take it piece by piece. I think the free buses, that's something that is, I think, achievable. We did essentially run free buses during the pandemic. Now, whether the city is able to afford that, especially with threats from Washington and an uncertain economy, we'll see. So that's one thing. It's certainly achievable, not easy. The freezing the rent is something that, frankly, I actually found the least compelling part of the campaign, because we're only talking about a couple million apartments. It doesn't solve the city's housing crisis, but it's something that Bill de Blasio did several times. It can be done. It's within his control. It probably should be done.
Expenses for landlords, though, which are going up?
Yeah, but if you actually look at what Mayor Adams did, he increased the rent far beyond what the landlords were facing. And so New Yorkers are due for a rent freeze. That's fine. But the real question becomes, what about the rest of New Yorkers, the 60% who do not live in rent-stabilized apartments? And then the childcare initiative is going to be the biggest challenge, I think, in some ways that he has. Similar to de Blasio, he's going to have to find a way to work with Kathy Hochul and the state legislature to fund this massive entitlement program. I think it's a great idea. I think it's going to be very popular, but it's going to mean most likely raising taxes, and that's something that the governor has said she doesn't want to do.
We're talking in advance of his meeting with Donald Trump on Friday. Is this going to be another Trump-Zelensky meeting, or is this going to be quite different? Because Mamdani is no Zelensky?
Yeah, $1 million question. I know you and I are going to be watching it very carefully. You know, it's hard to predict. The reality is that Zohran Mamdani and Donald Trump are both extremely talented political operators, and they both know that about the other. So given what Donald Trump has said about Zohran Mamdani in private, which is that he clearly is a very talented politician, I would be surprised if he kind of made the same move he did initially with Zelensky and tried to embarrass Mamdani, because I think Trump may instinctually know that that might be more difficult in this case and it could backfire on him. At the same time, I mean, who can predict Donald Trump's behavior? Anything is possible. I think it's probably a savvy move by Mamdani, who is quite capable in person of charming a room.
At what point will Mamdani have to no longer describe himself as not being anti-Semitic?
That's a great question. I mean, I think in some ways...
I mean, Mayor Adams said the other day that he would, if he were a Jewish New Yorker, he'd worry about how his kids would fare in New York under Mamdani.
Look, I mean, you know, this is one of those issues that may never go away for him. He does have some significant Jewish support. He has many Jewish New Yorkers among his closest aides. And, you know, what he has said is that he is not anti-Semitic, and I don't know how many times he's going to have to say it. And I think, you know, some of that is, you know, deeply unfair. I mean, how many times does somebody have to say this? But his views on Israel, he says, are not his views the same as his views on Jewish people.
You can be pro-Palestinian and not be anti-Semitic.
Correct. And so, you know, I don't think his views are that far off from the views of many New Yorkers, including many Jewish New Yorkers. One of the questions is, you know, how is he going to navigate that moving forward in a really unstable political environment nationally, especially when, you know, anti-Semitism and other hate crimes are, you know, they have been rising. But there's no suggestion that Zohran Mamdani is somebody who hates Jewish people. And I think that line of attack has been not only inaccurate and misleading, but oftentimes has veered into Islamophobia and racism. And, you know, that is really ugly. And we saw that in the waning days of the campaign when Andrew Cuomo, in I think what was a pretty desperate bid, essentially ran Islamophobic and racist ads against Mamdani. And it didn't work, which should be, I think, for all New Yorkers, a point of pride, whether you didn't even vote at all or voted for Andrew Cuomo in the end. This is a city where we like to live with people who are not like us.
And pretty remarkable that in this city, which has more Jews than any other place in Israel, we elected a Muslim mayor. I think that is a source of pride indeed.
Yep.
Mara Gay, opinion writer for the New York Times, thanks for joining us. And that's it for this edition of Close Up. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts. Don't forget to download the CUNY TV app. You can watch our show anytime, anywhere.